Thank you, Lucy, and welcome everyone. It's lovely to see you here again. I hope we have returning participants, but let me just welcome everyone who has just joined us for the first time. So yes, I teach English and I teach academic English and translation studies and so on, but I also worked as a language teacher in primary and secondary schools and also in private schools. So I have experience in various places. Today's webinar will be about reading with young learners specifically. And we will be talking about how you can generally use young readers just to engage students. We will first look at what the benefits of using young readers and stories with children are. And then we will also look at how we can use readers as real resources in the classroom, work with them both verbally and visually and in all sorts of different ways. And then I'd like to give you some ideas on how you can actually integrate reading programs into your courses and teaching, because I think there are a lot of solutions and you can try the best solution for your own class. So for today, I will have two stories for you. One is the Velveteen Rabbit, because Christmas is coming and it's a beautiful story for the winter and the holiday season. And I will have another one, which is a really autumny, beautiful young reader. So the Four Friends and the Hunter. But before we get started with these titles, I'd like you to just slow down a bit and just look at this image. It is the first double page from the Velveteen Rabbit. And when you look at the image, it's a good idea to just focus on the story without really analyzing or describing what you can see in the double page. Because based on my experience, when students look at images in the language class, not young learners, but older students, they like to just describe what they see and then move on as if it was an exam task. Now, for you as teachers and for students as well, there's a lot more to do with these images. So I would just start like, what's the story and what's going on in this picture? Because when you ask for the what's going on in this picture question, it asks for a story. So students start looking for like a narrative. And then I think it's really important to ask how it makes students feel, or how does it make you feel? And whether it looks familiar or not. So I can't read the chat messages right now, but if you just write the first idea that comes to your mind when you're looking at this image, I would love to read it back to see how you feel about this image and how you feel about this whole scene. And I recommend this kind of way into a story and into any kind of images, whether you're using young readers or just simple pictures, to engage the students this way. All right. So stories. Why do they actually work in the language class? I have just collected all these basic ideas for you to give you some insights. I'm sure you are already familiar with these ideas, but let's just summarize how they work. So stories give us patterns, and patterns in stories help us actually make sense of information. We know that every story usually has a beginning, there's some kind of story happening, a complication in the middle, and then hopefully in most stories there's some kind of resolution, and we see different patterns for different types of stories, and it makes us feel good and it makes us feel comfortable, and students love this also because they know what to expect. From a cognitive perspective, stories help with memory because they create the mental images which make new information more memorable. And I think this is very important when I ask my own students, no matter how old they are, and I ask them like, can you remember the course book that you worked with? And then they always tell me the one which had stories in it, either integrated or the teachers chose particular whatever narratives they had. And when I ask the 20-something-year-old students, they always tell me this. And when I ask my staff, I have the same experience. So Narratives will help us with memory. This is a human cognitive thing, so why not use them in the language class? Stories also give us context. I like to say in my linguistics classes that language is context and meaning is context. And when you have a story, new information is always presented in a familiar story context. So students are able to actually make connections between new and old knowledge they already had. So it gives them context, and it makes new words, new grammar more approachable in a way. Of course, stories will help you with emotions. And when you are emotionally, in whatever way, connected with a story, you are more likely to remember it. And this links us to empathy, because when I see how a character behaves, how they feel in a certain situation, it might trigger empathy in me. And I might actually start observing the world from their perspective, or think like them, or think about their situation. In any case, I will just be probably more empathetic and think about how other people are feeling. And finally, these stories help with social connections, because when we read a story together, that kind of act of reading, we'll create a community in the classroom. But it's also a wider thing, because when you talk to someone and they also know the Velveteen Rabbit, and I also know the Velveteen Rabbit, and no matter where they are in the world, there will be a connection between us. So they connect within the classroom, but they also connect us globally. And that's a beautiful thing about stories as well, I think. Three benefits of using stories, particularly in the language class, could be that when you have a story with beautiful illustrations, they will engage the students' curiosity, they will engage their interest, and they will be like fuel for their imagination. It will be easier for you to explain things, because once you have these reference points in the context, then you don't have to translate that much, you don't have to explain that much, and things will just make more sense. And they are also a good start for language learning games, activities, and projects. So no matter if you want to do role play or acting out activities, or start any kind of arts and crafts project, a story will give you a good idea. So these are just three really basic benefits, but three with high impact, I think. Now, when we look at the young readers, and when I say young readers, I in the Helbling series, I mean the Thinking Train or the Helbling young readers, either classics or fiction. When you see them that they are not similar to typical language learning materials. I use them mostly as picture books, but picture books with a twist. So by picture books, I mean that they function for me. I read them with my own child. They function for me just like any other children's book, which is a wonderful thing, because they are friendly, they are easy to access, and they engage kids from 2 years on, I think, or whatever age on. But compared to other picture books, they give me a lot more, because you will see when we look inside the books that they have interactive boxes to engage the student in any kind of thinking or language use. They have online audio materials in MP3 format. You can find them on Easy on Kids. They contain all the language learning activities. They have a project, which is always a lovely arts and crafts or some kind of creative project. They have online games on eZone. We have the big book versions, which I think are just wonderful for in-class reading. And then you have lots of flashcards if you go online, and you can use these flashcards to learn vocabulary, but to play games and so on. Just the other day, I played with flashcards with a group of fifth-year teacher trainees. And I think that flashcards can be so much fun with no matter what age you're using it for. So always remember to use the flashcards, I think. And once you download them, you can just print them as many times as you like. So they are more like stories, but they are turned into learning resources. So think about them that way. Now, when you start looking inside, when we think of a picture book, the first thing that comes to my mind is that, okay, there will be picture and there will be text. Now, we can use these resources for lots of powerful things in the classroom. So look at this first double page from Four Friends and the Hunter. You can see a beautiful autumn scene. We are in a forest, and there are four friends. There's a mouse, a frog, a crow, and a deer. And they are good friends in the forest. It's an autumn scene. When you look at only the verbal language, and when you look at only the text, you will see that it's a level A book, so it uses simple language. Students will feel comfortable about it. There's a lot of repetition in it, even within the first page, because if you look at the point box, then it will have students point to the mouse, the frog and crow, and the deer. So they will have that kind of recycling and repetition to remember the vocabulary. You also have the audio sign, you can see that. So it introduces a third resource, which will be the audio. So you can listen and read, and you can read it out and listen. And then there's a lot more happening in the images. And when you look at the visual kind of field of the whole double page, and it will be the same on each double page, you will see that the images and the colors, not just the figures, but the colors and the whole visual layer supports the verbal meaning. It gives you the context, and it creates a certain atmosphere, which I think it's a really warm and welcoming atmosphere. It's a really happy atmosphere. But at the same time, there's no equal really relationship between the image and the text, because the text needs to be simpler, because students are still like beginner language learners. So you have a lot more information in the image, which is not said in the text. That helps you as the teacher to illustrate things, to label things, to tell students, to explain things to students, or actually just after reading the first sentences, just stop and explore the images more, play with vocabulary, play with prepositions, and play with descriptions, and play whatever you can notice with. So for example, you can look at details, what's in the background, what colors you can see, what sizes the actual animals are. And you can talk about feelings. And it will also create an opportunity for more language learning, discussion and games, of course. But there's like all those ants climbing up the tree. There's a tree trunk, and there are flowers, and the grass is still green. And so there's a lot more you can actually describe. You can start practicing like where the actual animals are and so on. So if you start looking more closely at the images, you will see, and I think we need to be very explicit about this, that you will see that they can be used in a really straightforward and still fun way to help students with language learning. But we need to slow down to do this and let the image do its work as well. Now, if you look at inside the other reader, the Webtoon Ribbit, which is a level F reader, it's much higher level for language learners. You will see that it still has simple language. It has the past tense now. I don't know if you can see and read the text. So it has the past tense now. It contains a lot more interesting adjectives, specific words connected to Christmas. So there's a stocking, and they are in the nursery, and there are presents. So it's a very much like a Christmas scene. So you can do the same thing. And again, here you can start playing with like what you can see under the tree, what toys you can see. And you will see that right on the left side in the corner, there's the little rabbit. And he's like the origin of like that's where the things start. That's where you start reading the image. Like his gaze is like going in the direction of the text. So like from left to right. So it gives you a perspective on the whole under the tree Christmas scene. Here, of course, the vocabulary is much complex. Also in the images, you can start playing a lot more with the describing what you can see in under the tree, what kind of toys and so on. Now, what's interesting here is when you start taking a closer look at how images start working. And I always tell people that you don't need to tell your students all this information. You don't need to share all this information with your students about how the images work. It helps you as the teacher to discover more meanings when you start looking at the images from like a more analytical perspective to see what meanings the image contains. So for example, if you look at the left-hand side image, there you can see the little boy and the rabbit really close together. It's more like a close-up image where they are looking at you, and it seems that you are like on the same level in the bedroom, in the bed with them, hiding under the blanket. It's really comfortable and friendly, and it's really inviting. So it creates this kind of closeness and friendship. But then in the last page, in the next double page on the right-hand side image, you will see that we are outside. This is when the rabbit is real now and they meet again. They are all again at eye level, but they are a bit more distant. There's a connection between them, but there's the fence between them. So there's a lot of interesting meaning inside the images that you can play with, explore, and point out certain things like what can you see in the background, where are they now, why are they not touching each other, why are they not holding each other anymore, what happened to the story. So the image will actually give you a lot more about the emotions, about the relationship between the people, which might not be explained in the text, but it will give the students an idea, and they will feel it, and it will create a more detailed, more atmospheric context for the story itself. So pay a little attention to how the images are actually built up and what kind of colors you can see as well. That also matters. Okay, so how can you actually work with the verbal visual meaning is an interesting question. So I would say that you can start with any of the following 8 ideas. Some of them I mentioned before, but here you can see them all summarized. So I think that images are the best for observation and labeling. So first, you just ask students to slow down and pay attention. We need a lot of that, I think, today. And when you read out loud and you just, the whole story, when you sit down with a big book or a small book, or if everybody has their own copy, then they can really hold it and hear your voice and just listen, and you don't need to explain anything. That's the way I go about it first, to have that kind of whole story experience at the beginning of the reading session. And then when you are reading it out, maybe for the second time, we need to use the fact that young children love repetition, because that's how they will remember the words, that you can retell the same story several times, even within one session. So you can read it out loud and point at the details. And that kind of labeling is actually, research says that is it has the highest impact on vocabulary learning. Then I would really stop and ask students how they feel. How does an image make them feel? Is it a happy image? Of course, you don't need to use very sophisticated, complex vocabulary here, but is it a happy image? Is it a sad image? Is it warm or is it cold? Or how does it make you feel? And maybe they can actually focus on different characters and their embodied emotions. It's like, what can you see in the way they are sitting? Like, how are they sitting? Are they comfortable or are they not? So they can just ask about how the characters are feeling. And then here comes an interesting activity when the students can actually copy that behavior and make a face and then say, I'm happy, or I'm lazy, or I'm I don't know, sad, or something like that. Then you can like ask, and this is all lexical development here, proportion, like who is the largest, who is small, who can fly, and you can then point out different things about like the animals. The deer is really big, the mouse is really small. So that's good language practice, which again is not in the text, but once you have read the story, you might want to play with the images. What's in the background, again, you can ask, like what colors you can say, you can notice something funny. For some reason, kids I have shown this picture to, they think that all those little ants or insects were climbing up the tree look really funny there. And then, of course, you can practice the prepositions, who is behind whom and who is sitting on top of whom, and so on. So you see, there's the one layer of language activities that you can do when you are reading the actual story. But then there's the second layer where you can actually play with the images. And let's see the next one. Image, text, and audio. This is interesting because mostly we talk about the image, and there's the illustrations, and there is the text, the story itself in these picture books. But when it comes to graded readers, you have a lot more because you also have the audio recording. And it's easy to access it now. You just go on eZone and it will be an MP3 file presented in a really friendly way. You can show it even on the whiteboard if you want to do that. So this is the screen you see on Helbling eZone Kids. There's the story, page 1, exercise 2, and page 3 exercise. So you will have audio recordings for the exercises as well. And that's the eZone Kids. Maybe you know it already. I just wanted to show it to you that it's really easy to find and it's very friendly to use even in the classroom. So you will have, with the audio narration, it's very clear and slow. It's a bit more than you just reading it. There are benefits to both, actually, whether you want to read it or you want to play the recording. If you play the recording, then you will have a really nice and clear narration with soundscapes, and it's lovely to hear the noises of the forest. So you can play with that. It creates a more, I don't know, kind of multisensory experience. It has students engage in story time. It models pronunciation and intonation, both for you and the students. And it supports attention because once actually somebody is reading slowly, then you are really paying attention to the text and also to the image. Now, if you want to use your own voice, that has also benefits, of course, because then you can stop and point at things whenever you see that the students, maybe they are not paying enough attention, or maybe you can read their faces and see that they are lost, they don't understand something. So both have benefits, and I would combine them. I would just play the audio recording, and I would also read it out loud several times. That was my biggest lesson, that I used the same one story several times in one classroom in multiple ways. So how can you work with the audio resources? You can just read the text out loud. Students can listen to the audio recording page by page or the whole book. They can do it at home as well. I would just sometimes, when we are reading it for the second or third time, I would sometimes stop. It could be a game and ask students whenever I stop to repeat a word. Or I would tell the students to say stop to me every time they hear, for example, an animal name, or every time they hear a particular verb. So every time they hear the word deer, they can just tell me to stop. And it's a good game. And sometimes I make a mistake just to make fun of the situation and make them laugh. Or you can just ask them to cover the text and just listen to you. Or close the book and just listen, because you are then focusing on different types of listening skills. Every time you are listening in a different way. Of course, you can listen and act it out. Whatever you hear, you can just kind of repeat it and play with it. Or, for example, The Four Friends and the Hunters has some really nice dialogues. So you could be the narrator, and at certain times, students can just read a dialogue or say certain sentences. So there are multiple ways that you can actually work with the audio and work with the sounds and work with the actual verbal spoken interaction around the text. Okay, let's move on to some more activities. So maybe you are familiar with this, but let me just give you a summary. There are always activities before and after the actual story. You will usually have 2 pages before, or 8 pages after, 4 pages before, and 6 pages after. You have a make and do project page right at the end of the Thinking Train books, and you have a PlayStation project page right at the end of the Young Reader series. These project pages are always somehow related to the readers. So, for example, for Four Friends and the Hunter, it's a beautiful nature theme to how to make a bird feeder with details and everything. So I would actually dedicate a whole lesson to it, because it gives me the chance to work with real language, with real context, and also just somehow link back to the story. Or or you can make shadow puppets in the theater. It's a bit more complicated, but actually it explains very clearly, and you can just, again, do that in the class, and it can be like a reward for the students. If you go online, also you can download these pages if you'd like to give copies to your students. You will find them on eZone Kids as well. So this is a bit more creative way of engaging students after the lessons, but they also do more than just arts and crafts activities, because they practice the language of verbs, and they recycle a lot of words related to the story. Now, the digital element is important. I don't know how you are in school with the digital content, but as long as it is controlled in a way, and it has been chosen for young readers, I think we are on the safe side. And you will see that you can actually do access a lot of extra materials digitally for yourself. So you will have the answer keys for the thinking train box. You will have the answer keys, reading and writing worksheet. If you're interested in exam preparation, you will have Cambridge Starters listening and speaking worksheet. And for the audio for that, you have the answers and the flashcards. And that's where I think you should just download them, save them, and have them ready. But there's more, because you also get the games for the students, in which they can play either individually or in teams. So if you decide to play in the classroom, they can just play in teams. But I think it's also a nice thing to have it as extra practice, either during the holiday or just for the weekend. Kids love the spot the difference activities, but here actually this is also a listening activity. If you listen, so there's a little bit of extension, and it's not just a simple describe the differences, but they can also listen. And what's nice about it is it's self-correcting, and it has a very cheerful kind of feedback. So kids will really feel that they are playing when they are actually learning. So try that. And then you will have, for the Velveteen Rabbit, for example, you again have this really friendly interface with really nice buttons and everything. You can listen to the story. And then I chose here a simple exercise. It's a bit more language focused as well, where you can actually, again, I show you like play your team one. So you can play in teams. And here it's a language practice activity, a gap fill activity, but again, it's more interactive and it's more playful, and I think kids generally love this. Okay. Now, how can you actually integrate reading into your language classes is again a big question. Now, if you are already doing it, it's great. If you're not, maybe if you're doing it, you still need some more ideas. I also ask myself, and I ask my students to think about, like, how much time do you have? How much time can you dedicate to reading during the term or during a school year, and also weekly? So you need to be more like a manager here and manage the time of your students and yourself. So how frequently you can do it? What's your purpose? How many students will be there? How many copies of the readers do you need? Do you need a big book? Do you want them to read in groups, or do you want them to read individually? It's all up to you. You know your classes best, so you decide. I think what I would do, I used to do this with my colleagues when I worked in private schools or in primary and secondary, that we would just sit down in the staff room and do a brainstorming session, or I would do it on my own and have a big plan right at the beginning of the course, or whenever I felt like it was time for it, especially during the holidays. I think we need a lot more reading for the students because they are tired and we are running out of nice activities. So I don't think that is a right time to start it. Of course, it's good to, if you set up a reading program right at the beginning of the course or the term, but I think even the holidays can be a good excuse and a good reason for it. So it's up to you. So when you have made decisions about the time, and you have actually analyzed how much time you have for the reading lessons, Then it's time to make a reading plan. You decided the time and you define your goals. Now, what can your goals be? You can just decide that I want my students to read 5 stories this year. That's nice. Or I want them to read stories and perform them. Okay. Or I want them to actually prepare for an exam and I will use the readers to support their exam preparation. Well, you can also do that. I want them to learn new vocabulary. I want them to become familiar with certain topics. Or you might just want to link it somehow to your course topics, like course book topics, which is, again, easy to do because if you look at the variety of readers, you will be able to pick and choose a lot for specific content related to the school curriculum and your course book units. And then you can design a reading project and choose books for your projects. You can go with 2 or 3, or you can say like, I will read 1 a week. It's, again, up to you. You know your possibilities, so work with that. My favorite, of course, is always dedicating a whole course to reading, in which I choose. And what's fantastic is that I think that with these readers, you can actually plan a whole course. So the whole course based on reading with integrated language focused activities, and that this way you choose several books in whatever particular order. You can even go higher level after 2 or 3 books, choose a higher level book. Of course, ideally, this could happen, but I know that it's not always the case in a primary school that you can do that. So if you are not in that situation, you can just go with weekly reading sessions in which you select a set of stories for the course, again, based on either events, holidays, whatever your students are interested in. So you can do a little questionnaire at the beginning of the course to see what they are interested in: football, animals, sports, or I don't know, dragons, because you will find books with dragons, of course, as well in the series. So it's up to you. And you can just dedicate weekly reading sessions. It can be either just 1 lesson, or it can be 30 minutes every Friday. Again, whatever you can afford. Block reading is also interesting. Well, you can just decide beginning or end of the course, or during the summer holidays, during the winter holidays, 1 or 2 books. You can just say, even when you see that, okay, it's time to slow down because we are getting all tired, then you go into or you have run out of activities from your course book, you never know. Then you switch and you decide to do more block reading. Or you can do an extensive reading project, which is a bit similar to the weekly reading sessions, but that is more time-based. With an extensive reading project, you can just say that, okay, I will decide to read all through my courses and all through the term, from September or July through whenever we have the first break. And I will just give students books to read at home, and we will reflect on them in the classroom, or we will just dedicate lessons whenever we have the time to the book, maybe weekly, maybe every second Monday, maybe monthly. And that way they have the stories always as kind of a reward or relaxation or some kind of more from project-based reading. Again, it's up to you. I think there are lots of solutions. I mentioned a couple of reading goals. So here they are summarized for you. You can have topical choices to build specific vocabulary and grammar. Again, this can be books about nature, books about relationship and friendship, books about school. If you check out the catalog, you will see that there are more than 1 titles dedicated to each of these topics. And of course, you can do a combination, like 1 book about nature, sports, and friendship, and the family, and so on. Your reading book related to this or not could be exam preparation with integrated activities. Or you can just say, I do project-based reading. I see a lot of this all over the world when people say that I have a big environmental project, or I have a project about school life, or the role of the family or family life, and I read stories around that topic, maybe with some kind of creative outcome. A really popular creative outcome is more like a digital composition in which the students design, it doesn't need to be digital, some kind of more visual composition in which, especially with young readers, with young learners, you can design a poster, which is not that text heavy, and they don't need to have so much language knowledge, but they are still playing with the new vocabulary, and they design some kind of project poster around these topics. So that can be one goal as well. Or you can be reading for creativity. Creativity here is the most obvious thing to do, is the creative outcome, like the projects at the end of the lessons. Or you can be reading and performing some scenes from stories. I keep saying that because I have done quite a lot of that, and it has always been a success. And of course, you can say that I'm just reading in general for cultural, social, and emotional development of my students. And I will also think about topics which might be a bit more difficult, or might actually open their perspectives even at a young age, and show them how colorful and wonderful the world is, and how important friendships are. Or I can just show them like how to, there's a book in the Thinking Train series about the bullying. So that can also be an interesting thing when you can address through a story something that might be a bit more difficult to talk about openly with young readers or young learners, sorry, and you can just do that through the story. So here again, you can focus on relationships and culture and emotions. So there's a lot you can choose from, and you know best what you are interested in. So here's a sequence you can follow if you'd like to design a reading project. Choose the topic, select the stories, do some in-class reading with read-along sessions, design dialogues around the stories, and the dialogue doesn't have to be, again, really philosophical or something. It can be very basic. You can work with language development activities, the creative activities, and if you can, or if your students like it, you can act it out. Okay. So here are some project ideas for you. This is quite a big map, but this can be or a reading project idea. It can be a starting point for you. So you have topics like science, girl power, environment, social issues, the classics, seasons, and arts and crafts. A lot more books can be chosen for each of these topics, but for lack of space and for like no time here, I can just mention a couple. So check out the catalog and you will see there's science and learning, and there's something about space in Paul Learns to Plan, or Mooney Goes on Holidays, about the moon, and the figure of the moon comes to Earth. So again, it's more about like exploring space. Connected to this, on the Helbling Readers blog, you will see we have actual lesson plans, project-based lesson plans. Girl power is big, so why not read Little Red Riding Hood, the Snow Queen? Survival is about a little girl who gets lost in the jungle and then uses her survival skills to actually find her family. Or the Desert Race, you have 4 girls there racing through the desert, so that's also beautiful. When it comes to the environment, we have the Sick Dragon, which deals with environmental issues, but it is also dragons, which is quite fun. 4 Friends and the Hunter, you have seen. It's a story of 4 friends, the 4 animals, when they try to save themselves from the hunter. Social issues, The Beach is a beautiful story where 2 little girls make friends. They both go to the beach. One of them goes on holiday and the other one is a refugee. So they meet on the beach and they make friends through sharing a doll. So that's a lovely story. Then the classics, again, we have the Little Red Riding Hood, or we have Greek mythology, lots of stories. The seasons, maybe you want to go the nature way, but focus more on the seasons. So Food for the Winter is about little chipmunks who are saving Food for the Winter. The Velveteen Rabbit deals with like the passing of time you can see in it, but it's also holiday based and Christmas focused. For Friends is again an autumn themed book. It's either because of the topic or maybe the setting is some related to some kind of season. And then when it comes to arts and crafts, you can create snowflakes through the Snow Queen story, design party invitation with Freddy the Frog Prince, or create a flag garland through the story Can I Play, which is set in a school. So there's a lot you can play with. There's a lot to do. It's up to you to choose. And I think one of the most important things is like how, when you have designed all this, and I said it's important that you start building dialogues around the stories. So here's a map. Let me just explain it a bit. You will see how it makes sense. So there are lots of ways of integrating dialogues around story time or into story time. One, before reading the story. The purpose here is to activate background knowledge. And you can just ask students very simple questions about the prediction, like prediction questions, like who are the people in this story? What happens to them? Who are good friends? Who are maybe enemies? What problem happens here? So you can use very simple questions to ask students to predict, maybe based on the images that they can see on the cover or in the big book. So you can use this, of course, to activate background knowledge through even pre-teaching or just revising vocabulary and introducing the whole scene. I think that when it comes to questions and dialogues, it's important that we integrate both open-ended and yes or no questions. What can you see? Where are they? Why is he crying? What color is the sea? And so on. But yes or no questions have their function as well, because they can just have students focus on something, make a decision, practice vocabulary. Is the boy sad? Yes, he is. So you have practiced one word. Is it a cloudy day? Or are there 3 children? So when you ask very simple questions with young learners, they can be really helpful. So, but you are still engaging in dialogue. When it comes to dialogues, you can use the front and end covers and ask students to observe things like what can you see on the cover? And what can you see like at the back of the book? And then when I'm talking about observation and dialogue, I mean that the layout of the actual book and the colors used are also important. So what color is the sea? What color is the background? What color is the sky? And so on. So is it a dark image or a light image? So very simple questions can help students be more observant. You can have dialogue starters. For example, you can start a sentence when you are looking at the double page or an image together. You start a sentence and then the students simply finish it. Or they can just give you a very simple description of what they can see. When it comes to emotions, then ask students to say, reflect. I keep saying this, I know I also mentioned it in the beginning, but I think it's important to make them aware of how they feel in connection with the story. So how do you feel about it? If they are higher level, or you can use your first language to ask it, like, how would you feel? How do you feel about this story? Is it a happy story or a sad story, if you want to keep it very simple? Retell and recall, that's also a way to build a dialogue. You can just retell the story. Of course, it's harder for young children. So I would just use the images to help them, or give them keywords at higher levels maybe. But I think that from age 5 or 6, children can work with keywords and images. What I noticed is that children love telling a story again and again in their own version as well. So I would just give the story to them and let them just in a very simple retelling, just retell their own stories to each other. And this happens here and this happens there, and they love saying that. And finally, like the real world and making connections, where the most obvious way of like opening up the book is using the projects I had mentioned before, because that will find some kind of creative link or scientific link or some kind of social link between you and the story. Or you can make your own connections, pick out any interesting feature or a character or a detail from the book and focus on that a little bit more. Like when it comes to Four Friends and the Hunter, then you can talk about forests in general, like what is the last forest you visited, what can you see there, what kind of animals live in the forests around us, because it's different in every part of the world. Or you can just talk about, with the Velveteen Rabbit, like it's about a soft toy, so your toys and what is your favorite toy, and at that moment you're already making a connection between the story world and our own world. So that is also an easy solution. So again, this is about the importance of dialogues. And finally, just 10 reading tips to help you with thinking a bit more about how you can work with these readers. So remember to become familiar with the context and the plot, you yourself, before you start reading it, because you will immediately associate the story with other things that you are teaching and you would like your students to know. Do some before reading preparation with the students, because that makes them comfortable about the whole reading and more confident. I experiment with different reading approaches. My students love asking me, like, what is the best approach to reading? Well, I always tell them, I don't know. You know what's the best for you. You need to choose. If you want to project, then you do a project-based reading. When you want to just focus on an inquiry-based kind of learning experience, then you do that. If you want intensive reading actually to happen in the classroom, and you say, well, I want to still practice intensive reading and focus on language use in context, you can also do that. It's, I think, what's important that we experiment with it. Slow reading together is a good idea, I think, to do when you are reading with the students and they also have the chance to read out loud. We need to model that quite a lot to the students, because then they can hear our own voices and intonation and they can imitate that. We need to give space to the visuals. I think I have made a quite clear point of that, like how you can work with the visual world of any story and see how the words and the images work together, whether they have the same meaning or different meaning, or one says something different from the other, creating a funny situation. One of the most important things that is often really forgotten is the audio. Like how we just sometimes listen, but we don't really work with the audio. So use the audio for a lot of things that we mentioned here today. Do guided speaking practice built around the stories. Again, you have students explore a vocabulary item, feelings, actions, and so on. Do some after reading consolidation, of course, and the activities in the readers will help you with that, and extend the reading experience. So as a summary, that's what you see with making real connections, or doing a project, or designing a poster, retelling the story to each other as well. And closing thoughts, as a little bit of summary. So stories are memorable and engaging. I wish we could just use them in every course we teach. And remember that reading supports language development. That's the most important thing, but it does a lot more, because it helps with visual literacy, and it helps with attention, emotions and empathy, social skills and critical literacy skills. And we can't get started with critical literacy skills early enough. And when we are actually helping students observe and notice things in picture books, we actually prepare them to be critical readers at a later age. Now we do it in a playful way without being too explicit about it. But when they have that, absorb that kind of relationship with books, then it will be much easier for them as when they are teenagers to read more carefully and more attentively, I think. Make reading happen in whatever way. So I don't feel that we should be obliged to design the whole course only on reading, of course. But if you feel like reading once a week, twice a week, once a month, it's up to you, or only during the holidays. But in whatever way, you can just make it happen. Use multimodal and digital resources, so work with the audio, the image, but also work with the digital, because that will just give students extra practice opportunities, and build projects around the books. So use them not just like narratives to be read and then put on the shelf, but use them as resources for a whole learning experience. So if you can do any of this, I think you will have a really successful reading experience with your students. And I really hope that you find the right titles for their interests and for your pedagogical objectives. So with that, let me just recommend the Helbling Readers blog. This is just a collection of a couple of blogs. We have hundreds of blogs where you can find activities and project ideas and methodology and all sorts of other things. So these are just a couple of blogs related to young learners. Girl Power, there's a whole lesson plan on the Velveteen Rabbit. During the holidays, how you can read. An Advent reading calendar we have, using online games, dialogue. You can read more about what we discussed here today. Or there's a blog about how to build vocabulary with young readers. So go on the blog and explore it to get even more ideas. You can follow the QR code to do that. And I hope you find something interesting for you and your classes. Thank you for participating today. And if you have any questions, or if you have written in the chat box, we can talk about them now, or we can just get back to you in the chat box. Thank you.